All right, again, I appreciate everybody showing up today. We will now move on to roll call and excuse members. So we have 6 members present today, with the 7th member continuing to recuse themselves from this conversation. At this time, I'd ask that everybody please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance Thank you. All right, on to item number 5, which is approval of the agenda for the June 27th, 2023 regular meeting.
Mr. Chairman, may I have approval to speak? Yes, sir. Okay. I would like to make a motion, before we discuss anything related to the height of the proposed temple, I believe the board would benefit greatly in their decision-making process to hear from other subject matter experts. With that, I would like to make a motion to retable item 7B from our last meeting, which is the city planner's interpretation of the building code as it pertains to the height of the proposed LDS temple at 555 Temple View Drive. I would like to have that placed in position of before 7, before we talk about anything with the building height, so make it item 6B. My reasons for wanting to retable item 7B are, 1, I find it highly irresponsible for us to make a legal decision about the height of any building without agreeing upon and understanding the current building code and law. 2, I also seek to remove any perception of bias among the board by inviting our city's subject matter experts to provide us with a better understanding. I have invited our Fire Marshal, Sam Wild, and our city building official, Sean Collier, to ask them some questions and seek for clarification as it relates to the interpretation of the code. 3, I received an email from our Fire Marshal that I didn't have prior to our last meeting that I think is very pertinent in our decision. And 4, I also feel that it is important that board member Josh White have an opportunity to weigh in on the interpretation.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So we have a motion, I guess, to add that to the agenda as item 6B. Do I have a second? The second time I'm asking, do I have a second? Second. Okay, I took a second from Scott. So we're voting on that point of clarification, Mr. Kolpicki. Do we need to vote on that as a separate motion and then approval of the agenda as a second? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're voting on just the addition of Matt's motion as item 6B. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, Utana, the ayes were Scott, Kim, Matt, and Josh, and the noes were Dan and myself. Okay, so with that item added now as 6B, I will then call for a motion to approve the agenda for the June 27th, 2023 regular meeting. So moved. Okay, took a motion from Scott. Do I have a second? I took a second from Kim. Okay, voting on approval of the agenda for the June 27th, 2023 regular meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that was unanimous. All right, on to item number 6, approval of the minutes from the June 15th, 2023 special meeting. I'd like to point out for the public's benefit, there was a change to the minutes based on some input from the board that was included in the packet that is currently available on the City of Cody website. Do I have any other comments? Kim?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have 2 additional changes. The meeting was actually called closer to 5:30, not 6 o'clock. And then those present would include the city attorney, Scott Kopicki, not Scott Kitchen.
Okay, thank you. Does everybody, and I just want to confirm everybody has seen the updated minutes. Okay, I would then entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the June 15th special meeting.
I'll make a motion
Okay, I took a motion from Scott to approve the minutes with the additions that Kim just added, and I took a second from Josh. So voting on approval of the minutes from the June 15th, 2023 special meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Utana, that was unanimous. All right. On to item now, 6B, which would be, can I see that written? So item 6B would be a discussion of the city planner's interpretation of the building code as it pertains to the height of the proposed LDS temple at 555 Temple View Drive. So also on this, for a point of clarification for the board, we have closed public comment. We have closed presentations as well. So today we will be asking questions of people at the podium. So now that this item is open, Matt, I understand that you would like to ask questions.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, following our meeting, it was rather apparent that there was some confusion as it pertains to the interpretation of the temple's building height. Most of us, including me, were speaking from a perspective that is grossly ignorant of the normal legal details that are administered by city planning and zoning departments. For this reason, I have asked our city's building official, Sean Collier, to attend this meeting and hopefully enlighten us as it relates to the current building code and the law. Sean, can I get you to come up here? I've got a list of like 9 or 10 questions I'd like to ask you, Sean. Carson's asked us to be very direct in our answers. My first question, I have a few housekeeping questions that I'd like to ask. The first one is could you state your name and occupation and how long you have been working at interpreting and enforcing building code law? Sure. Sorry about this. We'll keep moving forward. Thank you.
Got to be careful with this one. Yep. We'll just hang on to it. So my name is Sean Collier. I work for the City of Cody Building Department. I've been the building official for going on about 5 years. I've been with the City of Cody for a total of 9, maybe 9 plus. My certificates basically range from residential inspection, building inspection, plan review, plumbing, mechanical codes. I've gone through legal training, management training for building department. So I have a pretty wide range of certifications. My duties for the building department for the City of Cody are to basically interpret and enforce the provisions of the adopted codes. The state basically mandates us, if we want to have home rule and sole authority, to adopt those codes. So, and we have to have certified people to basically interpret and enforce those provisions as they're written.
Okay, thank you. We're just going to go back and forth here for a second, sorry. Matt?
My second question, we as members of the board still have no clear definition of the height of the proposed temple because to this point, we have rejected the city planner's interpretation of the city building code and the current building code law. Is there anyone more qualified than yourself to discuss current building code and the law in the city of Cody?
Other than myself?
Yeah, is there anyone more qualified than yourself to discuss building code law?
Not the way our codes are written, no.
Okay. My third question is please don't take this personal, But I do need to ask another question because it seems to be a hot topic right now. Are you a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
No, I am not.
Great. Okay,
He said, no, he is not. I'll keep passing the mic back. Thank you. Matt, continue.
my fourth question is per the current building code and the law, could you describe what the structure of the proposed Cody, Wyoming temple is? And you may read your letter from June 1st, 2023. This is the letter I didn't have.
So based on my interpretation, the temple is what we would consider in code compliance a A3 assembly occupancy. Assembly occupancies are types of structures that have a large occupant calculation, larger than a business occupancy or a mercantile or anything like that. So essentially, basically, the church has to apply by, or has to be held to the same standards as any other building, but based on its type of construction and its occupancy type. Occupant load factors kick in, all sorts of other provisions like fire suppression and other things that we look at, alarm systems possibly. But there are height allowances for those structures. There's all sorts of height allowances for other structures that would be pertinent to this type of structure.
Okay, not to get in the weeds, but
Sure.
specifically, could you define what the structure of the proposed Wyoming temple is per your interpretation of the code and the law?
The temple itself is an A3 assembly occupancy church place for religious worship.
Okay. Could you get more specific as to the steeple and the building and their relationship to one another?
So based on the definitions provided by the code, the steeple and tower and or spire, and if you chose to have, if your building design chose to have a dome on it, like some of our governmental buildings do in bigger cities, essentially that is covered through the specific definition of rooftop structures, which is defined as a structure erected on top of the roof deck or on top of any part of a building. So essentially, by my interpretation, the tower, steeple, and spire is its own portion of the structure. It does not necessarily add to a story. It is not defined as a story. So the definition of it is, as the code reads, is a structure erected on top of the roof deck or on top of any part of a building.
Okay.
For a second. Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Could you clarify where you said that was the definition?
Yep.
What in the code? Could you clarify what code that was the definition in?
That is in Chapter 2 of the 2021 IBC, International Building Code.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
My next question would be, how did you arrive at that conclusion?
That was the definition?
Yeah,
By reading the code and interpreting the code and,
okay, great.
Yep.
My sixth question is per the current building code and the law, how many floors are in the proposed temple?
one, to my knowledge at this point.
Perfect. Number 7, per the current building code and the law, what is the height of the roof of the proposed Cody, Wyoming temple?
I believe it's 26 foot to the main parapet or the main roof line.
Perfect. Number 8, what is your confidence level that yours, the city planners, and the fire marshal's interpretation, given the current building code and law, as it pertains to the proposed temple, is accurate?
Very confident. I've been through this code and these codes multiple times. Just like I do with any project, I review it in accordance with the codes and with the information provided. Basically go back through the code books. There's not a single large or small commercial project that I don't throw my book open to, because the black letter of the code is what gives me my direction.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Just a couple more questions. Number 9 is, per the current building code and the law, is there any other way to interpret the proposed Cody, Wyoming temple?
Not the way our codes are written right now. The only thing that would be a factor would be the actual definitive and final type of construction that they propose to build the structure with. So that's the only thing that's going to vary on the heights by code
Okay.
that it can be allowed to be built to.
Thanks,
Which,
Sean. One more, last one. Number 10, per the current building code and the law, is the proposed temple with a building height of roughly 25 feet and a steeple that qualifies as a rooftop structure of 77 feet for a total feet of around 102 feet tall, in compliance with the current building code and the law?
it definitely is, especially if they're going with a higher type of construction and or they're constructing the temple's tower out of what we would consider non-combustible construction. They can actually be unlimited in height.
To follow up on that, so it could be unlimited in height, and the qualifications are, it has to be non-combustible,
That's correct.
it can't be used for storage,
That's correct. Or
and
habitation.
it can't be inhabited, right?
Right.
And it has to be of similar, construction as the main building, is that
Or,
correct?
or more stringent, basically. So let's say that the first story, the only one story that you have, the 26-foot tall story, which is actually allowed to be 40 feet in height total. If you wanted to do one story 40 foot, you could, because the height table allows that based on, other types of constructions. That's your limited amount. On top of that, yes, basically, as long as the steeple, temple, spire is not habitable, is only used for equipment therein, like belfry that would hold a bell or other electronic bell sounding equipment. Basically, yeah, it can be unlimited in height based on the type of construction and or 100% non-combustible construction.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's as simple as I can get.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Collier while he's up at the podium? Okay, we got a question from Scott.
Okay?
The question I have for you is there anything in the code that references rooftop projections that might appear or seem at scale to be an additional story on a building?
No, not for this type of construction.
Thank
Not
you.
by my interpretation.
Okay, any other questions for Sean while he's up at the podium? Nope. Thank you. Okay, thank you. You can sit down. Okay, any other discussion amongst the board on this particular item? Okay, Dan has a question for Scott Kopicki. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Sorry. Let's go this way.
We'll get there.
Okay. Mr. Kopecki, Mr. Moss said that no interpretation of the building height was due to the rejection of our interpretation of the city planner's height, that interpretation, okay, let me back up. So the city planner's height interpretation that was presented on the 15th was rejected by the board. It failed. So Mr. Moss said earlier here when he was talking to Sean that resulted in no interpretation of the building height. Mr. Stoll, in his staff report that was issued yesterday late about 5:45, also wrote that the board has not determined the official building height that is proposed. It would seem that both of those comments are indicators that there's a belief that because the board rejected his original interpretation, that no interpretation exists. Is that accurate?
Part of that depends on, I can't read everybody's mind, so I don't know how you all interpreted the lack of action. There was there was a motion that was made and failed, and then there was no subsequent motion to reject or accept that interpretation. So essentially what the city planner and what Dr. Moss are saying is accurate to the extent that there is no interpretation because there was no subsequent motion to approve it. There was no motion to either reject it or no motion to approve it that passed.
Okay, so the original proposals and the fact that the applicant originally applied for a variance, would that not indicate that the original height proposed and the presumption from the applicant was that the height of this building is over 100 feet, including the spire. Otherwise, I would suggest that they would not have filed in variance.
The special exemption they requested, and the city planner could probably speak more to this, there was a process involved in that. My understanding is at the beginning of the process, there was some uncertainty as to whether or not that spire, that steeple was part of the building or not, which is why they chose to apply for the special exemption. I don't think there was a presumption one way or the other. It was based on lack of clarity at the time when they filed the application.
Okay, thank you.
Matt,
If any other board members have a better interpretation of the code, I'd love to hear it.
okay, thanks, Matt. Any other discussion? Dan, do you have something to add? Okay.
I do. Dr. Moss, I would respond.
Let me, because we've been going back and forth, let me clarify, it needs to be directed through me,
Okay.
not at individuals.
Mr. Chair, I feel the same way that I did on the 15th, that if we were to ask the general public on the street who were not involved in this item, what the interpretation of a building height is, that they would include that spire. So that would be my response to Mr. Moss's question.
Thanks, Dan. Any other, hold on, any other discussion specifically on this? Okay, Matt, you got another question?
Sean, could I ask another question from you real quick when you come down here?
You're gonna need that mic down there again, Scott.
Turn it off. There you go, should be good.
Sean, could you just quickly address, I guess, Dan, Mr. Shine had stated that he think the general public, could you answer that as it relates to the building code that we have adopted in our city, please?
Sure. So the exceptions that are in the code that is actually specifically given to or in the code for towers, steeples, spires, and domes, or other rooftop structures, they actually define it as other rooftop structures, basically is added on top of what the maximum allowable height is by code. There is a table that defines that very clearly, and the stories, they have a maximum allowable stories table, they have a maximum allowable heights table, and that height is what your main structure can be, and then the exceptions are granted to towers, steeples, spires, domes, and other rooftop structures to extend above that a certain amount. And it depends on how you build it as to how far it can extend. And again, I'll repeat that if it's built properly or in a certain way, it could be unlimited in height.
Okay, thank you.
Hang on to that.
Yeah, leave that up on the podium, please.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion or questions amongst the board? Okay, I mean, I'll have a point of discussion here. So I understand what we've heard. I understand the line of questioning. I also tend to agree with Dan's point. I also would point to the fact that we're bringing in codes and definitions from outside, but only codes and definitions that certain people want to be brought in and not brought in. The city of Cody code does define ways to measure the height of the building. It also doesn't define what a tower is. And I would also point to the fact that our submittal from the applicant refers to it as a tower. It has 4 walls. It does not come to a tight point as we've been using these words steeple and spire and all these things interchangeably. People have been moving their own definitions in and out. And so I know what I have read in the city code, and I am of the belief that this does count towards the height, and therefore want to see the process go to a special exemption. So that's how I'll be voting.
Do you have a question, Todd?
Well, that would be up to me to follow.
Okay. No, I have, my question is, I lost my train of thought, sorry.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, Scott's got a question.
close to it? My question is, can we get new microphones? Apparently. So, Mr. Chairman, my question relates back to the interpretation of the building height and the misunderstanding of the board's decision on that one. Is there any other authority that this board has to make an interpretation on that?
Okay. Todd, I think now would be appropriate time to ask, Todd, you can answer his question, and then if you'd like to add whatever your other one was, whatever else you had to add after that, I think there's a mic on your table.
Okay, could you repeat the question just one more time?
Todd, my question, let's hope this doesn't go off again. My question is basically what authority does this board have in regards to the understanding of what that building height looks like, since we haven't come to a conclusion of the same term of building height as you have?
Okay, so is my responsibility as city planner, I need to interpret the zoning code and apply it. I have provided my interpretation of how I think building height is measured according to the zoning code, okay? Normally that decision would have to be appealed to the Board of Adjustment, or Planning and Zoning Board has your role of Board of Adjustment. I don't think a formal appeal has been made, but I know it was a significant issue, so I presented the issue voluntarily to the Planning and Zoning Board for a decision. As I noted in my staff report, I have not made that decision on my own. I consulted heavily with the city attorney in obtaining his interpretation of the building height per the zoning code. Again, it's not what someone wishes it said, it's how do you interpret the plain language of the definition. My frustration with the board right now is no one has provided an alternate explanation or logic to why the interpretation that has been provided is invalid, nor have they provided any alternatives for discussion. So therefore, in my view, you don't like it, but no one has explained why or provided an alternative analysis that appears valid.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Todd, did you have a second question you wanted to ask the board or something? You raised your hand earlier.
That's all.
Okay, thank you. Scott, something else?
Yes, but I'll pass it along because others do as well.
Okay, Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I personally have no problem with what our planner has done. I think he made every effort to clarify what he used to come up with the determination of height based on what is currently in our ordinances. However, I listened and I read comments from everyone. It's not an issue of height. I think he's correct on that. The issue is what we call, per our ordinances, building elevation. To begin with, this is kind of lengthy, this is my research, so bear with me. To start with, I looked at the definition, and pardon me, that I did not go through building code, I only looked at zoning code, that's my responsibility. The definition of a structure. It's any object constructed or installed that uses of which require location in one, it's either attached to the ground or something having a permanent location in or on the ground. Structures include, but not limited to, buildings, decks, fences, towers, flagpoles, signs, and other similar objects. And I would concur with our chairman, this is not a spire, it is a tower. Ask any little 5-year-old to build a tower and you're gonna get something looking identically to it. Or if you wanna stretch the imagination, it's a steeple. So using that as a structure, it is a structure on a building whose height is 50 feet. The next definition I looked at in the ordinance for zoning is building elevation. Elevation is the exterior face of a building, including all vertical elements facing in the same direction. That tower faces in all 4 directions. So if you take the structure plus the building, you come up with what is called an elevation. Now, I am not an attorney, I'm not well-spoken, but I am a citizen of Cody. And when the people were talking and writing into us, their concern was the elevation, not the height. They used the word height, but their intent was the word building elevation. So based on that, I then looked at more of the ordinance, and the beginning of our ordinance starts out with, it is to be implemented in accordance with the City of Cody's master plan, AKA the comprehensive plan that was put into our ordinance in March of 2017. The next section, 10.1-4, talks about the rules of interpretation. They're to be held at minimum requirements, not to be more stringent. So if there's a conflict in the rules, it's to take the actual written statements, not tables or diagrams. Then the next section in there talks about meaning and intent. And the intent, obviously, on both sides, was the citizens of Cody came together in 2014 and came up at that time with a master plan. It was replacing a master plan of I believe 1997. That plan was replaced because it was outdated, it was put on a shelf and became dusty. It was quite adamant by our citizenship that this master plan would be a living, breathing document that would not be put on the shelf. When it was put in place, it was up to the cities, whether they be volunteers or employees, to follow through on what the citizens wanted with that master plan and implement it. And I will personally apologize, I was not here and involved in the implementation. That master plan got put back on the shelf and is dusty. It needs to be taken out, and based on what the citizenship is, we need to talk about elevation. The other thing we need to consider is there a precedent? Is there something out there that is similar to this building that's in place? I do not know of any precedent that is allowing a building with a structure that's over 2 times its size to be in the city of Cody. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Any other discussion or question? Hey, please just keep applause or boos or anything else to yourself during this meeting so that we can get through. I appreciate you guys wanting to get involved, but if we could just keep that at a minimum, I'd appreciate it. Okay, any other questions or discussion? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain a motion. Matt.
I'd like to make a motion that the board finds that the proposed Cody, Wyoming Temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints complies with the Cody zoning regulations for maximum number of stories and maximum built height, as it, A, does not exceed 2 stories, and B, does not exceed 30 feet in building height as defined by the Cody zoning ordinance. Furthermore, the board rules that as the height requirements are met, the special exemption application is unnecessary for the Cody Temple proposal.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So do I have a second on Matt's motion? Okay, a second time I'm asking, do I have a second on Matt's motion? You know what, I'll second it so we go to vote. Okay, voting on this particular item. We're going to go one by one because I imagine we're split, so the Utah can record these. Scott, voting on the motion.
Nay.
I have a nay from Scott. Nay. Dan, I have a nay from Dan. Kim.
Aye.
I have an aye from Kim. I am a nay. Matt.
Aye.
Matt is an aye. Josh.
Nay.
Josh is a nay. The motion fails with only two affirmative votes. Okay, on to item number 7, which is a reconsideration of the conditional use permit findings related to building height. On this particular item, as we were reviewing our minutes, we had a little bit of a hiccup in the procedural side of things. So because of that, We are reconsidering the conditional use permit findings specifically related to height, which I believe was number, hold on. So specifically, it would be discussing principle 3.1 point F, building heights. So it is my understanding, and one of the changes that was made to the minutes was clarification that when we made the motion, the intent of this board was to not accept the building height interpretation of the city planner, which was how that particular motion was written in the packet. We discussed that. We asked Mr. Kolpicki at the June 15th meeting if that would still leave the special exemption on the table for further discussion. In the moment, the answer was yes. So again, this reconsideration is on that specific item. So if there's any discussion or motions specifically to that, I would entertain them at this time. Dan?
I make a motion that for clarification, that the intent of the board when we voted was to not approve the height of the building, or to not approve the height of the building, including the spire as presented, that it was the board's intent that that would be exempt because of our previous vote to not accept the city planner's interpretation.
Thanks, Dan. For clarification, that was just lengthy. I'm looking for clarification. Could a way to summarize that be to make principle 3.1.f conditional on a special exemption approval? Okay, I have confirmation from Dan that that is what the motion is. So we'd like to add on the reconsideration that principle 3.1.f of the conditional use permit would add the language that it is conditional on the approval of a special exemption. Is that clear, Mr. Kopicki? Okay, I'm getting a nod from him. So that is the motion. Do we have a second? Okay, second time I'm asking, do I have a second? Okay, I will second that. So we'll be voting on this reconsideration of the conditional use permit findings related to building height, which would be adding the fact that it would be conditional of a special exemption on height. So voting on that, we'll go down the list. Is there any further discussion before we go to vote? I'm seeing some confused faces. Anybody need clarification of what we're voting on? Okay, so we still don't have clarity on what we're voting on?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Scott.
Mr. Chairman, my question is on that building height interpretation and a special exemption, is it specifically that is going to fall under the exemption, or are there other things that this board has authority to discuss?
Scott, I think that question might be better for you.
If the question is whether you can open up the discussion of the other findings, you could, or you could also wait till the next item on the agenda, which also deals with the written findings, proposed findings for the conditional use permit.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It can open up to other questions.
Yes, if you want to discuss other findings that the board made in relation to the conditional use permit, you can do that also.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Scott, did that clarify that for you?
Yes.
Okay. So we do have a motion and a second, so we need to vote on this. So, Scott?
Aye.
I have an aye from Scott. Dan? Aye. I have an aye from Dan. Kim? I have a nay from Kim. I am an aye. Matt?
Nay.
I have a nay from Matt. Josh? I have an aye from Josh. I have 4 ayes, and so the motion passes. Okay. Back on the agenda, we are on to item number 9, or excuse me, item number 8, consideration of the proposed findings of fact of the conditional use permit. So, as part of our board packets, you all received a draft of findings of fact. This is to accompany the conditional use permit to further explain our reasoning on the conditional use permit. What we'll need to do here is get to a point where this draft is, a motion is made and it is approved or denied. So, would anybody, I will actually just go first on this. Just a second. Okay, so I have several red lines for our findings of fact. I sent this to the board earlier this morning. I also sent it to Mr. Kolpicki and to Todd. This is as far as for me, in order to vote in the affirmative, these would be my recommendations for this. I'm just going to go sheet by sheet. So looking at page 1, the paragraph that says, whereas the board has considered hundreds of comments in the form of emails, letters, phone calls, and further testimony at the advised public hearing and consider them within context of the applicable local laws. I scratch out the rest of that sentence. My reasoning being, I am not an expert in state, federal law, or the U.S. Constitution to where I feel comfortable in making that part of my finding of fact. Okay, on to sheet number 2. This would be item number 2. Is the use at the scale of or density proposed compatible with all other uses in the immediate area and with permitted uses that may be established in the area? Under finding, I scratched out the word lighting in the parentheses where it says e.g. traffic, lighting, and noise. On to page 3, item number 3, I removed the paragraph titled Parks in its entirety. I can recognize items 1 and 2 being comparables. I don't see item number 3 is comparable in the fact. I also, on that sheet, scratched out the finding that has the drawing of the 35-foot tall east of the property line. I also scratched out the final paragraph of that page. On to sheet number 4, on the second paragraph, it says finding the proposed illumination levels. I added the word direct between proposed and an illumination. Also in the last sentence or last line of that paragraph, I changed the word after 0.1 levels, I changed the word levels to foot candles. On to the next paragraph. I told you there's a lot of them, sorry Kim. On to the next paragraph, I removed that in its entirety. On to the third full paragraph on the page, I removed that in its entirety. On to the fourth full paragraph on that page, I removed that in its entirety. On to page 5. The third paragraph, it says finding with so much excess parking. I removed the word so much from that sentence. On to the fifth paragraph, I removed that in its entirety. I also removed the 7th paragraph in its entirety. On to page number 6. Under 5, that finding, that first paragraph underneath the number 5, I removed, on the very last line of that first paragraph, I removed the word significantly, so it should read, but the overall amount of city infrastructure is less than if it were and then I entered the words fully developed residential subdivision. On to sheet number 7. Under item number 6, I replaced the word in that first sentence, or excuse me, the second sentence, it says there are no known natural, scenic, or historic features on that site that are of significant importance. I replaced the word known with documented. On to item number 7, I removed the first finding in its entirety. Down to goal number 1 on that same page underneath item number 7, this would be page 7 as well. In the finding, it says a significant portion of the community views the temple as attractive. I removed the word significant from that sentence. I also deleted the second sentence in its entirety and replaced it with, the grounds proposed will be well kept and the arched doorways and windows fit the architecture consistent with Cody's history. On to page number 8, principle 1.1a. in the finding, it says, many view the temple and its grounds as aesthetically pleasing, is an amenity serving the region, and I added the words, and visitors from around the world. I removed the last sentence in its entirety. Principle 1.1D, under finding, the Planning and Zoning Board promotes the utilization of quality, and I removed a bunch of words there and replaced them with promotes the utilization of quality design, building materials, and construction. And then the next sentence I have reading, the temple building appears to meet those expectations. On to principle number 3.1.B. In the finding there, I removed it in its entirety and replaced it with houses of worship are allowed in neighborhoods, both existing and proposed, and historically are not deemed to affect the existing or planned character of the neighborhood. On to page number 9, which is under principle 3.1.C. I removed the words in the very last sentence, or excuse me, the finding is only one sentence. I removed the words greatly and the word extensive. So it will now read, the temple project provides adequate buffers due to increased setbacks and the landscaping provided within those setbacks. On to principle 3.1.F, building heights. I removed that finding in its entirety. This is also what we discussed on the item before this. And so I removed that finding in its entirety and put the temple building and its auxiliary building comply with the 30-foot building height limit of the zone it is located. This finding is conditional to the approval of a special exemption on tower height. On to principle 3.3b. Under the finding, I removed the first word, all, and replace it with, in terms of the conditional use permit, efforts, and I will read the rest of it, efforts have been made to provide a inclusive and extensive, I removed the word legitimate, review process, maintain a cooperative attitude, and seek proper mitigation of potential negative impacts to the extent of the applicable regulations. Okay, on to principle 13.1b. I removed the very first sentence of that finding in its entirety, and then I added to the end of it, this finding would be conditional to an approved site plan review to speak specifically to lighting. And then finally, on the additional findings, I would remove most of that in its entirety. I would leave it as saying the staff report was prepared in a manner that complies with the City of Cody Code. Again, because I am not an expert on the other items referenced in the draft. That is just, to make it clear, that is just a recommendation. To get my aye vote, I would want to see the entirety of my changes included in this findings of fact. Anybody else have any discussion or items to discuss? Dan.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make two additional changes to what you've already mentioned, although I do support every one that you've mentioned. Under Principle 1.1a on page 8, it says under the finding, many view the temple and its ground as aesthetically pleasing. I'm not sure what defines the word many, so I would like to replace the word many with some. Also on page number 10, Principle 1.1.h says a great ward design. Creativity on the part of private developers should be rewarded through recognition and support of the community. And the finding is that approval of the project would recognize great design. I'm sorry to say that I question whether this is actually a great design. Considering that this same design has been deployed multiple times in the past, I do not feel that it's deserving of that term great design, and I would strike that entire section.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, Scott, I have a point of clarification on that specifically. My understanding is if Dan's proposal would not like to see that in there, that's fine. I understand that we probably still need to have a finding of fact on that particular item.
That's absolutely correct. Yes, you need to have a finding to support the action the board already took.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Dan, do you have a specific finding that you would like to see written there? Okay. Anybody else on that particular item? I guess this one's kind of a little bit more collaborative, so we got to go back and forth. Kim, you were reaching for the mic.
Mr. Chairman, I did go up and see the temple as it was built in Helena. They had designs of buttercups added there, which were important to that community and that valley. On the June 15th meeting, Western culture for Cody was brought up, and the response from the architect for the applicant said that they put rounded windows in there to mirror our county courthouse and our post office. I visited our Heritage Center with my grandson on Sunday. There were never any round windows in the courthouse. If you look at it today, there's still no round windows. So I don't know that we really looked at Cody's character and heritage when they designed it, and I would concur that there needs to be more design that's pertinent to our community.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Josh?
Mr. Chair, so I would have to agree with your findings or your edits on there so far. Of this finding and fact document, there's several references to significant, many view, and I don't see supporting data that supports those statements. So I would have to disagree with this finding of fact as it is written.
Anybody else? Okay. Might I, any more, so no more discussion, any motions on what we have? Dan has a motion.
I believe that it's clear that the board is not willing to support this item at the moment, so I would make a motion that we table this.
Thanks, Dan. I took a motion from Dan to table the consideration of the proposed findings of fact of the conditional use permit. Do I have a second? I took a second from Kim. Sorry, Josh. Okay, so voting on that, voting on the tabling, we'll just go down again for Utana's benefit. Scott? Nay. I have a nay from Scott. Dan? Yes. I have an aye from Dan. Kim? Nay. I have a nay from Kim. I am an aye. Matt? Nay. I have a nay from Matt. I have an aye from Josh. It was 3-3. The motion does not pass to table it. Do I have any further motions on this particular item? Okay, asking one more time. Any motions on this item? Okay, this item dies for lack of motion. On to item number 9, which is a tabled item. A special exemption application related to the building height of the proposed temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, proposed at 555 Temple View Lane. Do I have a motion to untable? Okay, I took a motion from Kim, second. Okay, I took a second from Josh. Voting to untable the special exemption application related to building height. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous, Utana. All right, so now we are on item number 9, which is the special exemption application related to building height of the proposed temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, proposed at 555 Temple View Lane. So we've already had a presentation from both the applicant and city staff. Are there any other specific questions for the applicant or city staff? Okay, seeing none, is there any discussion specifically on this? Dan?
Mr. Chair, in consideration of the rejection of the city planner's proposed height interpretation, I feel and I am recommending that the board refer to the city master plan dated March 11th, 2014 for guidance in dealing with this item. In particular, page 22, principle 3.1.b that reads, existing neighborhoods protect the existing character in stable residential areas. New residential, office, commercial, or industrial development that is not in harmony with the existing or desired future character of these neighborhoods should be discouraged.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any other discussion on this item? Okay, Josh.
Mr. Chair, I cannot support item number 9 on the agenda due to the fact that the City of Cody Code 10-14-1, paragraph D, section 7, which governs conditional uses and the standards of review, specifically states in section 7, is the proposed use consistent with the applicable provisions of the Cody Master Plan. It is my opinion after reviewing the Cody Master Plan, adhering to Section 7, Paragraph D of 10-14-1 of the City Code. This plan and any of its exemption requests is not consistent with the applicable provisions of the Cody Master Plan.
Thanks, Josh. Matt?
I just want to post my support for the special exemption, given that our city planner, city building official, city fire marshal, they all say that is within code. It all complies with the law, and we as a board seem to be rejecting that. I find that tough. Anyway.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Any other discussion on this item? Okay, would we like to hear any motions on this particular item? Yes, Kim?
Mr. Chairman, I would entertain a motion to approve the special exemption application related to the building height of the proposed temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints proposed at 555 Temple View Lane.
Okay, I have a motion from Kim, and I took a second from Matt. Okay, voting on the special exemption application.
Clarification as presented?
As presented, yep.
As presented in the June 15th meeting by staff.
Yep, so this would be as presented. Okay, we have a motion and a second. So we're voting on this. I'll go one by one. Scott?
Nay.
I have a no from Scott. Dan? No. I have a nay from Dan. Kim?
Aye.
I have an aye from Kim. I am a nay. Matt?
Aye.
I have an aye from Matt. Josh? Nay. I have a nay from Josh. That motion fails. Do I have any other motions? No other motions. That item dies for, oh, Matt, sorry, you did motion towards me. We haven't asked any questions, I'm sorry. Matt?
In keeping with other houses of worship in the city, I know we have some, Mr. Stoll stated we have some that are 70 feet high. I would like to make a motion that we allow the special exemption up to 70 feet.
Okay, we have a new motion on the table. It would be to, Mr. Kolpicki, I will have a specific question, point of clarification on this. Is that, can we, I don't know if we have the authority to do that.
It's still addressing the item that's on the agenda, so yes, you can entertain that motion.
Okay, so would a better way to maybe to phrase that motion would be approval on it with the condition that it would be up to 70 feet? Okay, does that make sense, Matt? It was more of a housekeeping thing, so you said approving up to 8. I think in order to make this more like a housekeeping, it would be to approve it with the condition that it is only 70 feet. Is that fair?
I'm just trying to keep in accordance with what's already been set as precedent in the town, and I know there's steeples that are around 70 feet. I'm just throwing out a number.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Do I have a second on that? Any second? One more time, any second? Okay, the motion fails for lack of second. Do I have any other motions on this particular item? Okay, hearing none, the item dies for lack of motion. On to item number 10, which is a tabled item. Commercial site plan application for the proposed temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, proposed at 555 Temple View Lane. Do I have a motion to untable? Okay, I took a motion to untable from Dan. Do I have a second? I took a second from Josh. All in favor for untabling the commercial site plan application, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Utana, that was unanimous. Okay, as a point of clarification on this item as well, there was another kind of hiccup in our procedural side of things at the June 15th meeting. I would entertain potentially a motion to reconsider this item. The there was confusion on the way that it was voted on, the fact that there was an abstention, and in clarifying some things with staff and legal counsel, that would be a way to kind of clean up this procedurally. So do I have a motion for that? Okay, I took a motion from Kim. Do I have a second? I took a second from Josh. Voting on a motion to reconsider the commercial site plan application of the proposed temple. That's what we're voting on. We'll go down one by one. Scott? Aye. I have an aye from Scott. Dan? We're voting. You got to vote one way or the other, and then we already started that.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I
Yes,
apologize for interrupting, but the motion for reconsideration and the second need to come from one of the three members who voted in favor of that motion.
Understood. Thank you. I apologize. For clarification, who did I take the aye from?
Ms. Borer, I believe, made the motion. I believe the second was made by Mr. White.
Okay, so neither one of those. I apologize for that. So thank you for that point of clarification. So we do not have a motion and a second. I will open that up again to a motion and a second. Okay, I took a motion from Scott. Do I have a second? I will be the second. Okay, so we are voting to reconsider this item. The three affirmative votes from last time, now that works. Okay, so Scott. Aye. I have an aye from Scott. Dan. Aye. I have an aye from Dan. Kim. Nay. I have a nay from Kim. I have an aye. Matt. Okay, point of clarification.
Could you explain what we're voting on? I'm unclear right now. To reconsider the
This is a reconsideration of the site plan review.
Not approving the site plan, just reconsideration.
You tabled it last time after a vote where it was.
If it fails, then does what stand, the vote that we had the other night where it was 3-2? Or 3-1?
Right now, it's on the table as a motion to reconsider.
Okay, aye.
Okay, I have an aye from Matt. Josh? I have an aye from Josh. So it is a reconsideration of the commercial site plan application of the proposed temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, proposed at 555 Temple View Lane. Okay, speaking specifically on the site plan review, do we have any questions for city staff or the applicant? Matt?
I thought the site plan was well laid out. I thought it was considerate that you moved the temple at some 405 feet from the nearest residence. I like that you put excess parking so that it's not going to be overflow into the neighborhood. Anyway, I think it's beautiful, and the grounds are nice, and I think that it's well thought out.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Any other? Kim?
Mr. Chairman, my comments fall along the same line. It isn't the height that's at issue, it's the elevation. And we talked about that. They have a precedent. They built a 10,000 square foot in Montecito, Utah, and the total height of that is 66 feet, not 102 feet. And they wanted to be good neighbors. That is the issue of the neighbors. That includes the whole community of Cody, not just the NIMBYs, and they're not addressing the issues, so my vote would definitely be no.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Do I have any other questions or comments relating to the site plan?
You do.
Do anybody else besides, before I jump in here? Okay. I think, I have some concerns. So I would agree with Matt to an extent, and I discussed this at the June 15th meeting. I think from a parking standpoint, I think from a traffic standpoint, I think from a snow storage and a drainage, which is my area of expertise in my professional life, I think all of those things do meet the site plan. One of the questions, though, that I do have as it comes to this particular site plan and to the precedent set by this board and several others does have to do with the lighting. Looking at a specific case, and I know one of the points of clarification that Todd brought up last time in our June 15th meeting was, well, we're talking commercial versus residential. And my response to that would be, well, even more so then. But one of the comparisons that was made in the staff report on a repeated basis, and us discussing this, has been the Hampton Inn, which was approved by the Planning and Zoning Board, which none of us were on at the time, in 2019. And that site plan was approved with several conditions. One of them was a change of the constructed material on the outside. I don't necessarily have an opinion on that in specific, but the other one had to do with the lighting. I have driven by the Hampton Inn at night and during the day. I've also driven by several other churches in places of worship here in Cody at night, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night usually, to see what we're looking at and what our kind of what precedent has been set. And again, understanding also that most of those church buildings were constructed before we had the current planning and zoning rules that we do. But one of the things that I kept coming back to was the Hampton Inn case, where one of the conditions that this board, again, not having any of these current members on it, had in the conditions of approval was a 3,000 Kelvin light versus a 4,000 Kelvin light. For just clarification, so everybody's clear on that, that has to do with the brightness of that and the color of white, where the lower that number it is, it ends up being a little bit more of that yellow and softer light. Again, talking about some of my research and driving around town, I noticed that one of the examples that was in the staff report and compared it to was the Catholic Church, which is in an R2 zone. They have, in the picture, it shows in the staff report, they have one light, and it is very clear that it is under 3,000 Kelvin, as it is almost orange in color, that is shining on the Eucharist. They also have a tower at that church that has no lights on it at night. I also went by the First Presbyterian Church. That would be the church up on top of the hill further east from Albertsons. I noticed that they had two lights that did shine skyward. Again, that is one of the concerns that a lot of people have. Those two lights, though, were on the flags and not on the steeple or the tower. They also do have a tower there, and it is not lit. The other concern, and maybe the closest comparison to the location of the proposed temple, is the Christ the King Lutheran Church, which is on Stampede Avenue. They do have two lights that do shine upward. I would estimate them, based on that, probably to be somewhere around in that 3,000 to 4,000 Kelvin. But there is a large roof outcropping that stops any of that light from leaving the very front of that building. I also have two more thoughts when it comes to lighting. In our staff report and in our testimony, a couple of the comparisons that were made had to be with the ball fields on Sheridan Avenue up by the airport. That is true. Those are 60-foot towers, and those lights, I would definitely say, are not 4,000 Kelvin. But those are also seasonal, and they do have an on and off time, and it's not, and there are limitations on that. I would also, as I drive past it every day and have spent late nights on this particular planning and zoning in my office, notice that the Fremont Motor lights shut off at 10 p.m. to only be security lights. And I think that's what my point is with all of this. So, the assertion in the staff report was, that we couldn't really have any say on that. And I would say that precedent shows that we do have the authority to make conditions of approval. And so I do think that there is a possibility and an option to make conditions of approval for this site plan in terms of the architectural lighting when it has to do with this building. I, at this moment, have some ideas, but want to continue that conversation with the board right now. Are there any other questions or discussion? Anything else from anybody? I don't have anything else, Scott.
What do those conditions of approval look like?
I'll answer your question first. Kim, reach for the mic. Kim?
Mr. Chairman, one of our esteemed group had indicated, well, let's make it 70 feet. I don't believe we should be dictating. I think the applicant needs to bring to us something that's workable. I don't think we should be putting the rules in there and making their site plan for them. And that goes for lighting and elevation.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Any other discussion or questions on this item? Dan?
So to be clear, Mr. Chair, we could make a motion, if I understand this correctly, to accept the site plan application with certain restrictions placed upon that, being conditions, I'm sorry. Those conditions being a change in the Kelvin rating of the lighting, a change that the lighting on the facility be reduced to a certain amount when it is unoccupied, as well as another restriction that those lights are turned off except for possibly security lighting at a certain preset time, and that the approval would specifically exclude the spire, the tower. Since we have not approved it for the height, we would want to make sure that if that is in the applicant's plan, that is excluded. We don't want to get back into the previous mixture.
Thanks, Dan. Scott, that'll be a point of clarification for you. I think Dan, understanding Dan's intent would be to potentially approve it, but has a concern. Would that just be another condition that we could add to the approval?
Yes, if you wanted to just add a condition that it's still conditional upon approval, they could resubmit a special exemption application for a steeple, for example, and so if you're going to approve the site plan, you wanted to say that is granted, but except for the steeple portion, you could do that.
Okay, thanks, Scott, for that clarification. Any other discussion or questions on this? Okay, go ahead, Dan.
I would say that I appreciate Scott's input, Mr. Capecchi's input, and the conditions here. My question would be to my fellow board members, if we add a condition that we're requesting that the lighting be disabled at a certain time, what is the feeling from the board members as to what that time should be?
Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir. I don't think we got a clear understanding from the open house last June 15th as to what the hours of usage of this building is. It sounded like it was by appointment. I don't know if they have evening appointments or not, so that lighting becomes an issue. Also, sure. So have the applicant come.
Can we have somebody from the applicant team speak specifically to the kind of the hours of operation of this proposed temple?
Nope. There we go.
And could you just, since we're recording everything, introduce yourself? I appreciate it.
I'm Greg Rasmussen. I'm a director in Special Projects Department for the church. Those hours are determined later in the process. But if I were looking at typical hours, sometimes they can be as early as 6 in the morning, and usually will go until 10 at night.
Okay. Kim asked me a follow-up question. Would that be 7 days a week? How many? What would your total kind of schedule that way?
Good question. So usually not open on a Sunday or a Monday, so it would be 5 days a week.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant, since we have him up at the podium? I appreciate it, thank you. Any other discussion amongst the board? Hearing none, I would Josh?
Just a comment there. I'm trying to find it, but we were provided a letter from Haskell Engineering, and in it, it stated that the temple facility manager would be responsible for all aspects of the lights. So I'm not sure if that lines up with what I'm hearing, but just a comment.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Any other discussion or questions on the item? Scott, why don't you ask that then specifically?
My question was a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, on Josh's point of view of who actually manages the lights, and I was curious if the applicant could actually answer that.
me? Oh, you can hear me? Yeah, so that's per church direction. So the TFM would follow whatever we ask them to do. Yeah.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Josh and Scott? Did we have any other questions? I'd hate to have the gentleman sit down and come back up again.
It's better than sitting.
Appreciate that. Okay, thank you. Okay, Dan.
One final question, if I might. If you would be able to assist me, Mr. Chair, in determining what we are going to request or the condition we're going to place on the lighting. I understand Kelvin's because we go through it at home between yellow lights, white lights, et cetera, but for brightness, for the reduction that we're going to ask as a condition, could you guide me perhaps?
Point of clarification there for you, Dan. I don't quite understand it specific. Are you asking on the Kelvins or on the candles, or what are you asking specifically? The candle power? So, I mean, I'm not an expert on this. I just, from my experience on this particular board, have seen, what we have done and what we have required from all other buildings in town. And it is generally one of those two particular items. Either 4,000, which is a white light, but is not a blue light, or 3,000 starts to become more of a yellow light than a white light.
Yes, understood. But if the condition I was referring to was that we request that the lighting be reduced when it is unoccupied, can we, I presume that we can preset what level we would like them to be reduced to, but I don't know the terminology, yeah, exactly, and with safety issues.
I wouldn't know the answer.
Okay, fair enough.
Maybe the question on this would be to avoid specific tabling and to put this back in the court of the applicant, who does have the burden of showing proof of these items, would be maybe, and this might be a question for Scott specifically, could we approve this with a condition of a more specific lighting plan to be submitted and approved?
I believe the applicant has already provided some information to that. The city planner probably has more knowledge about that. But as far as, I think it would be a little bit ambiguous to try to approve it contingent upon receiving another lighting plan. If you're going to move that direction, perhaps it is better to consider tabling it.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Todd, would you like to speak specifically to the lighting plan and kind of the review of the lighting plan that you did as part of your staff report?
Sure, thanks. Okay, so the Cody, Wyoming Temple lighting plan has been provided by the applicants. If you remember that photometric map that showed each individual ISO line with the illumination levels for each fixture. And then if you zoomed in close enough, you could actually see the foot candles on specific points in that area. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, if you zoomed in on that photometric map, you could actually see the foot candle calculations of the combined illumination for any point within the temple site. The direction that the board has provided in the past is so long as the lighting levels are are greatly reduced by the time that they reach the property line, that has been determined adequate. In commercial areas, the board has not been too picky. I mean, if it's down to 1 or half of a foot candle at a property line, that's been acceptable in commercial areas. I don't know that we've ever had one in a residential area, but I will point out that if the city did have a dark sky ordinance, which we don't, the standards in such an ordinance are typically down to about 0.1 foot candles at the property line. And this lighting plan complies with that standard. Okay. Hold on.
So Todd, you're saying if we did have a night sky ordinance, this would comply with that?
This would comply with the requirement that the illumination be reduced to 0.1 foot candles at the property line.
So our applicant has done their homework and done what we would hope to have done.
Yes, when it comes to what the board has looked at in past practice.
Right, and that's for all the exterior lighting, or what lighting is that precisely?
Yeah, so that includes all of the site lighting, both the parking and the pathways. I do not believe the photometric map included the illumination of the temple building itself. Okay, but again, that's like 400 plus feet away. It's actually, it's kind of one of those things. You look at the lights on the top of Carter Mountain, you can see those lights, but they're not illuminating where you're standing. So in other words, it's where is the illumination and where does that end? And in this case, it's at the property line or on the city right of way.
Perfect, thank you, Todd. Any other questions for Todd while we have him up at the mic? Thanks, Todd. Okay, any other discussions or questions on this specific item? Matt?
Are we really gonna start dictating when people need to turn on their lights, how bright they can be, how not? This is all new to this board for sure. We've never had this discussion in 2-3 years.
Kim?
Mr. Chairman, we have Fremont is a perfect example. Those lights were put in before our lighting code. They were extremely bright, and they went completely off their property. And I'm not sure whether the city dictated to them or Fremont, by being a good neighbor to the community, changed it, and the lights do go off at 10 o'clock at night, and they do have them downcasted. So to answer your question, yes.
Okay. Any other discussion? Todd, and I'll call on you for a sec, after Todd, but Todd first.
I've asked the city attorney whether or not I should bring this up or not, because it was in one of my staff reports but was removed. But I am bringing it up at this point as far as precedent for architectural lighting. The board has discussed architectural lighting. I believe it was November 2000, sorry, I don't have it in front of me. November 9th, 2002, maybe 2001. It was, we had a contractor that came to the board wanting to install permanent, what I would call holiday lighting on Moss Orthodontics and on I Got Your Back massage out on Bighorn Avenue. Okay, the staff concern at that point was, okay, is this architectural lighting on the buildings, is it appropriate for a commercial area? I specifically asked commercial because I had no intent of regulating architectural lighting in residential zones, much less holiday lighting. What you're talking about is saying when people can turn on and off their Christmas lights. That's really what you're talking about here. So we're in a residential zone. We are looking at, okay, lighting that illuminates a building. During that discussion, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus here, Mr. Richard, but in that discussion, you specifically said that architectural lighting that enhances beautiful buildings should be, is a good thing, I guess. I don't know, remember the exact words. But what I'm trying to say is the board did set precedent in that discussion and gave me the staff direction to not look at architectural lighting in residential zones. Okay, so when Mr. Moss brings up the point, the board really hasn't discussed this before. There was one time it was discussed before. It was in that context that I just mentioned. And the direction to staff and the precedent that was set is that architectural lighting was effectively off limits. There's no specific regulation in our zoning code for architectural lighting. I mentioned in my staff report that all of our authority for regulating lighting is in our parking code. In other words, if it's not a light associated with parking, we have no authority to regulate it in our zoning code at this point.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Dan has a question for you.
Mr. Stahl, I take exception to your statement that we're trying to regulate lighting in residential areas and Christmas lights. This building is a building that requires a conditional use permit to be placed in the RR zone. This building cannot be built there by default, placed on our zoning ordinances. I do not believe that what we're describing here, because we are discussing a special use building in this RR zone that requires a conditional use permit, that my questions regarding restrictions on lighting are applicable to Christmas lights in our other residential zones, and I take exception to that.
Just a reminder for all our board members and Todd, because Todd, you did specifically address Scott, and then Dan just specifically addressed Todd. Please come through the board so that we can get through this. Or excuse me, through the chair. Thanks, Kim. Todd,
You want me to respond to that?
yeah, if you would, straight to me. Thanks, Todd.
Okay, yeah, so I think one of the fundamental, I would call it a misunderstanding on the conditional use permit as well as the special exemption, is that somehow I think the board has in their mind that they can require more of the project or proposal than they would require of other uses or activities that are permitted in this zone. And that's what I've relied on heavily in my staff reports, is that if it's allowed for permitted use, it should be allowed for a conditional use. Okay, so my reference to Christmas lighting, so forth, if it's allowed for permitted use, or if it's not even mentioned in the code as being regulated, I at least personally don't think it's appropriate to attempt to regulate that just because it requires the conditional use or special exemption review.
Okay, thanks, Todd. I got a follow-up question. I haven't forgot about you. We'll call you up right after Todd. So while we're talking about the nitty-gritty here and what the precedent of this board would be, so I have reviewed the meeting minutes and the agenda for the September 10th, 2019 Planning and Zoning Board meeting.
What date it was?
That would be when the Hampton Inn particular one
Hampton Inn. Okay.
went through the board. And so my specific question to you, because I look at this, it says that the board did ask the applicant if using 3,000 Kelvin exterior lights instead of proposed 4,000 Kelvin lights would be acceptable, and then they made that the condition of approval, as I read
Yes.
this.
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind me talking
Yeah,
about that a minute.
go ahead,
because-
Tom.
Because I was there. Was it Heidi Rasmussen that made that motion? Did it say in the minutes if you're looking?
So
at
the minutes would be, it was Aaron Selk asked the applicant if he agreed to
Okay.
that, and then Richard Jones asked that recommendation number 10 be added to the, amended to the state of the reduced light agreement.
Okay, I may be thinking of the final motion. Okay, so the history on that is, it was a hotel. When it explained the difference between different Kelvin ratings, the 4,000, 3,000, so forth, the applicant, since it's a hotel, they're wanting to provide a good environment for sleeping. Let me back up a little bit. Okay, so the difference between 4,000 Kelvin is the same light color as moonlight, okay? Less than that is more of a soft white, okay? And the higher the Kelvin, the more blue light that it contains. And if you've read much about blue light, whether it's from your computer or other sources, blue light can disrupt sleep patterns, and so forth. Okay, so the Hampton Inn, the board had hesitancy to require it. That's why it was discussed. They said, well, should this really be dictated? And therefore, they asked the applicant whether he just voluntarily was willing to go 3,000, since he heard, the information about the blue light and so forth. It was his preference to go with 3,000 Kelvin.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Any other questions for Todd specifically on this? Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stoll, just for point of clarification, I do think lights on buildings enhance the architectural value of something. However, I also have seen over the last several years, being on this board, that we have promoted downward-facing lights and asked people to comply with that. So again, I think one of my questions to you is just for more of a point of clarification. When we are discussing the Hampton Inn, that was a permitted use in a commercial zone.
Correct.
Correct. That falls under more authority of this board as an architectural review, correct? Than this current situation we're looking at.
Correct.
Because with a conditional use permit and allowing the fundamental rights of anybody in this room to worship how they see fit in a residential zone, I don't think anybody has a concern with that. The challenge that I see is we're in a residential neighborhood and we're talking about lighting up a tower, which is seen by many different residents right there as well as further across the city. I think that's the argument there. So, but my thing is, with what we're looking at here, by approving the conditional use permit, does that limit our ability to have any authority whatsoever when it comes to things such as the lighting for the site application? Does that make sense? It's less
I think-
restrictive, but in a more restrictive area that the master plan says that we're supposed to protect and promote. So I'm just trying to get the clarity of it.
Okay. Again, I know the board is relying heavily on the master plan. It's not adopted by ordinance. It does not have the same status as city code, which is adopted by ordinance. And I think I just want to go back to the statement previously in that the only ordinance that we have for regulating lighting pertains to parking lot lighting. So again, it's not what someone may wish we had regulations for, it's what are the current regulations.
Thank you.
Any other questions specifically for Todd? Okay, I promise to give you an opportunity to speak again.
These are difficult discussions, and we appreciate the board seeking this understanding. One thing that we've done in other jurisdictions with similar things is work on a development agreement with the city. It might be something that I would offer that we could work on with the city and look at specifics. It's a little difficult to do in an environment like this.
Okay, I appreciate that. This would be a point of clarification following up on that. And I have some experience with that with my own job, but would you guys, either Scott or Todd or even Philip, I know has some experience in this, would one of you, whoever's most qualified, kind of explain what that might look like?
I'm not sure if I'm most qualified, but certainly the city has actually entered into development agreements in other scenarios. If that's something the board is interested in doing, in having a discussion and conversation with the applicant about a potential development agreement with respect to some of these issues, then you could, again, consider tabling this item to allow those discussions to take place.
Okay. Did anybody else, either one of the city staff have anything else to add that specifically? Okay. Any other discussion or questions then? Okay, Dan?
Just to clarify, so we would be tabling the item today and having a discussion agreement between the board and the applicant on, for example, some of the comments that or conditions that I was discussing, so we could come to an agreement before we return for a vote?
That would be a question for you guys. I just want to clarify maybe what that question would be as well. My understanding, though, development agreements usually does not involve the board. It would be city staff, and then it would be presented later to us. Would that be a correct understanding?
That is correct.
Okay. Does that clarify that, Dan? Okay. Any other questions? Matt?
So are we saying we would approve the site plan conditional on them meeting with forming a development plan with the city?
Sure, Matt, well, hold on, I wasn't answering that. I was affirming that I heard you there. So what my understanding would be is the direction would be, if that is the decision of this board, that we would table this item again, with that then moving into a development agreement between the city, or to allow for a development agreement between the city and the applicant. So the actual motion would be to table it. Scott, another point of clarification, would we need to specify that that is why it is tabled? How would we handle that?
You could, I don't know that it's necessary, I think the staff has gotten the message through the course of the discussion, but whether it specifically refers to a development agreement or just direction to staff to work with the church to come up with some modifications potentially to the site plan one way or the other, I think that's what we're hearing from the board.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks, Scott. Any other questions or discussions? Scott?
Mr. Chairman, if we do table that for a development agreement conversation, does it then come back before our board to vote on? Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or discussion? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain any motions that anybody has.
I'll make a motion to table.
Okay, I have a motion from Scott to table. I have a second from Dan. Voting on tabling the commercial site plan application. All in favor, or actually, I will go down one by one for Utah's sake. Scott? Aye. I have an aye from Scott. Dan? Aye. I have an aye from Dan. Kim? Aye. I have an aye from Kim. I am an aye. Matt? Aye. I have an aye from Matt. Josh? Aye. I have an aye from Josh. That item has been tabled. Okay, with that, we move on to item number 11, which is new business. We have no new business. Item number 12, P&Z board matters. Announcements, comments, anything? Anything else from the board? Kim?
I would like to say I apologize. I apologize to all the citizens. That master plan was to be used by the city, and it was not. And so I'm asking the mayor, the manager, and the city council to wipe off the dust and get it out and relook at it and see that what the citizens ask for, they get.
Thanks, Kim. Any other announcements, comments from the board? Okay, council update. Councilmember Quick could not attend today, so we'll move on to item number 14, staff items. Anything else specifically from staff today? Okay, thank you. At this time, then I would take a motion to adjourn. I took it from Dan, second. A second from Kim. Voting in favor to adjourn. Any opposed? We are adjourned.